and it still feels fresh. You know, I was old enough to still remember everything. So, like after that, I had it's called like mitral valve prolapse, I guess, trauma to the heart. So I had like heart problems, and I got like tendon problems from getting stabbed in my tendon. Why did I have to get, dealt with the cards I got dealt with? Like everybody's like, be strong. Like it only happens to the strong ones, but like, how long can you be strong?
What happens when someone publicly begs for help and no one answers in time? Ashley Fonseca posted on Facebook, "I don't thought feel safe, he keeps threatening me." Hours later, she was gunned down inside her home, while her 2 sons were still there. We break down the warnings that were missed, the cycle that repeated itself, and the consequences of inaction. Here on True Crime Case Tapes, we ask, why didn't anyone step in? If you're watching this, take a second to hit like and drop a comment. Even tell us where you're tuning in from. We read every single one, and it helps bring stories like Ashley's to more people who need to hear them. Ashley Morris Fonseca was the kind of person whose presence made others feel steadier. At 37, she had built a life rooted in perseverance, love, and quiet strength. Her story didn't begin with tragedy, but tragedy had marked her path early. At just 12 years old, she was thrust into the center of one of Ohio's most harrowing crimes, a 1998 attack that took her mother's life and left Ashley fighting for her own. 14 stab wounds, 1 lost parent, years of recovery, and somehow, Ashley survived. But she didn't just move on, she grew into someone determined to protect others. Those closest to her say she turned pain into purpose, especially when it came to raising her 2 sons, DeAndre, 15, and D'Angelo, 7. They were her everything. Every decision, every job she took, every moment of joy, it revolved around her boys. For them, she created as much normalcy as she could, shielding them from the violence she had once known firsthand. Ashley never sought pity. In fact, many didn't even realize what she had lived through as a child. That changed 2 years before her death, when she agreed to speak publicly for the first time. In a local TV interview, Ashley recounted the day she was attacked alongside her mother, not for attention, but to raise awareness about domestic violence. She described how the system hadn't protected them, how her mother's pleas had gone unheard, and how cycles of abuse could take root without warning. It was a raw public reflection, one of the few times she let the world see what she had carried all along. Friends say that behind the camera, Ashley rarely talked about that day again. She had done it once, for a reason, and that was enough. What mattered most to her wasn't the past, but the future she was building for her kids. She worked hard to provide for them, maintained a strong bond with her extended family, and kept a tight circle of people she trusted. Those in her community knew her as a protective mother, a fierce advocate for safety, and someone who still believed in healing, despite everything she'd endured. Ashley also held tightly to the memory of her late mother, Vivian. The two had been inseparable. After her death, Ashley often spoke of wanting to live in a way that honored her, to create the life her mother never got to finish. That grief was never far from her, but she transformed it into motivation. She talked to her sons about their grandmother with respect, not fear. She wanted them to know the strength they came from. At home in South Toledo, Ashley built a life that looked stable on the outside. She lived in the Boulder Creek apartments, surrounded by people who knew her. Her boys were on summer break in June 2025, and she was focused on spending more time with them. Her youngest had just finished first grade. Her oldest was talking about jobs and school plans. Ashley had goals too, to move into a bigger space, maybe even buy a home one day. She wanted her sons to grow up feeling safe, seen, and loved. But something had started to shift behind closed doors. Ashley's circle noticed changes. She seemed more guarded, more stressed. Some days she'd go quiet mid-conversation, glancing at her phone with concern. She didn't say much, not yet, but the tension was there, just below the surface. The past she had escaped was beginning to echo again, and this time she wasn't a child. Lawrence Moore was not a name most people in Toledo recognized. He wasn't a public figure, a business owner, or someone with any media profile. He was known only within Ashley Fonseca's circle, as her boyfriend. He wasn't the father of her children, but over time he became part of the household. Their relationship, according to those close to Ashley, had started like many others. casual, even hopeful. But over the months, things shifted. Friends began noticing bruises on Ashley's belongings, broken appliances, smashed frames, a dented wall. It wasn't just property, it was behavior. Ashley became quieter about her home life. She didn't volunteer many details, but when asked directly, she didn't deny what was happening either. In small moments, while waiting in a parking lot, sitting beside a friend, she'd open up in fragments. He was angry a lot. He didn't like being told no. He'd break things when he was upset. And then it escalated. At some point, Moore began using a gun as a tool of control. Ashley confided that he would press it against her stomach or her head during arguments. Not when he was defending himself, but when she pushed back. He threatened to hurt her. He threatened to leave her children without a mother. He threatened often and vividly to destroy the only life she had built. This wasn't just verbal cruelty. These were direct threats of lethal violence, and they weren't kept behind closed doors. Ashley posted about it on Facebook. In a post that would later become central to the investigation, Ashley wrote, "He sets always threatening me, puts the gun to my head. My kids are gonna be motherless. This is getting out of control. I don't feel safe." She shared that message with her entire network, friends, family, co-workers, neighbors. It wasn't a cryptic comment or vague status. It was a documented cry for help, time-stamped, public, unfiltered. And it was posted the same day she was killed. Those who saw it were left with questions they may never shake. Did anyone report it? Could someone have called police? Did Ashley believe she'd be protected if she came forward? It's not clear whether she had contacted authorities herself. There are no records of a formal complaint, protective order, or prior police intervention. No documented calls to emergency services before the shooting. Whether that's because she feared retaliation or didn't trust the system or simply ran out of time, we may never know. But what's painfully clear is this: Ashley did speak out, and it made no difference. Moore's behavior fit a well-documented pattern in domestic violence cases. Experts refer to it as coercive control, a slow, systematic dismantling of a victim's freedom. It starts with verbal pressure, then isolation, then destruction of property. Eventually, it crosses into physical intimidation. In many cases, the presence of a firearm increases the risk of homicide exponentially. Victims are not only at risk of injury, they're living with the constant looming possibility of death. Ashley was acutely aware of that possibility. Her post made that obvious. She wasn't simply venting or expressing frustration. She was describing in real time a pattern of abuse with specific threats to her life. One former neighbor would later say the warning signs were blaring, but hindsight doesn't change outcomes. Moore's trajectory was already in motion, and Ashley's call for help didn't lead to intervention. There were no mandated welfare checks, no officers at the door, no urgent follow-up. The timeline shows that the post went live and no emergency services arrived until her teenage son dialed 911 hours later, after the shooting had already occurred. This reality raises difficult questions for communities, for authorities, and for social networks themselves. When someone says, "I don't feel safe," how should that be handled? When someone names the person threatening them, why is there no immediate protocol for outreach or protection? Ashley's death wasn't unpredictable. It followed a trajectory familiar to anyone who's studied intimate partner violence. The only difference was that she didn't keep it hidden. She documented the threat, she named it, she made it visible, and yet she remained alone in the most crucial hours. Her final post wasn't just a warning, it was a record of how clear a threat can be and how little is done until it's too late. It was the first week of summer break. On June 25, 2025, around 9 a.m., the Fonseca apartment in South Toledo was in the middle of a routine morning. Ashley was home with both of her sons. Her youngest, 7-year-old D'Angelo, had finished first grade just days earlier. Her eldest, DeAndre, was 15 and keeping busy with a flexible summer schedule. No one was rushing anywhere that morning. It was a weekday, but the rhythm of school year chaos had slowed. Outside, the Boulder Creek apartments on South Burn Road sat in their usual quiet. There was no sign that anything was wrong inside Unit 3B. Lawrence Moore was inside that apartment too. What exactly led to the final confrontation is not known. There were no witnesses beyond the two boys. What is confirmed is that Moore and Ashley were in the same home that morning. Whether they had argued, whether tension had built overnight, or whether he arrived that morning with a plan, that's something no one can definitively state. What is known is that shortly after 9 a.m., gunfire rang out inside the home. The shooting happened fast. In a matter of moments, Ashley went from standing to falling. She was struck by multiple bullets at close range, her body crumpling to the floor. She didn't die immediately. She was conscious enough for her son to find her still breathing, but she was gravely wounded. Moore, after pulling the trigger, didn't flee. He didn't speak to the children. He didn't attempt to call for help. He walked to another part of the apartment and turned the gun on himself. A single self-inflicted shot to the chest ended his life where he stood. In the immediate aftermath, the home was silent, except for the chaos unfolding in the minds of two children. DeAndre, just 15, had to take control. He found his mother bleeding, unresponsive but alive. With his younger brother in the same apartment and their mother on the floor, he picked up the phone and called 911. His voice was clear, direct. He told the dispatcher what happened. Police arrived within minutes. First responders found a scene that needed no guesswork. Lawrence Moore was deceased, the firearms still near his body. Ashley was found nearby, barely conscious, with gunshot wounds in her torso. Her sons were present, visibly shaken but alive. Officers immediately secured the space, calling for emergency medical assistance and removing the children from the immediate scene. A local officer later said, "Just knowing that her son had to be the one to call 911, I can't imagine." Officers described DeAndre's composure as extraordinary given the horror he'd just witnessed. He did exactly what needed to be done, but the emotional cost was immediate and profound. Ashley was rushed to the hospital in critical condition. Her injuries were extensive. Surgeons worked to stabilize her, and for a time there was hope she might survive. She was placed on life support, but her condition remained dire. Doctors were able to keep her alive long enough to honor one of her final wishes to donate her organs. That window, small and precious, was one of the only moments of control her family had left. Back at the scene, police began processing the apartment. Their goal wasn't to build a case for trial. Moore was already dead, but to understand the full scope of what had taken place. They confirmed the gun belonged to Moore. The ballistic evidence matched the weapon to both the bullets recovered from Ashley and the shot that ended Moore's life. Powder burns and the angle of entry were consistent with a self-inflicted wound. The coroner's office later ruled his death a suicide. There was no defensive struggle, no sign that Ashley had fought back or tried to wrestle the gun away. This was a one-sided act of violence. It was quick, methodical, and final. Nothing in the apartment suggested a third party had been involved. The apartment wasn't ransacked. There were no signs of a break-in. Ashley had simply been home with her children, and Moore had pulled the trigger. In interviews with family members and those closest to Ashley, it became clear that she had feared this might happen. They told police about her growing anxiety, about recent conversations where she expressed concern that Moore was becoming unstable, about her sense of urgency in trying to create a safety plan, something she hadn't spoken of before. The Facebook post she made earlier that morning was shared with detectives. It gave a timestamp, a context, a motive. But it also gave them a timeline, one that revealed just how fast things had spiraled. From the moment Ashley posted about Moore's threats to the moment her son dialed 911, only a few hours had passed. That single morning held everything: the plea, the act, and the fallout. Police confirmed the sequence quickly. No one disputed what had occurred. The weapon was recovered, the forensic evidence was clean, and the eyewitness account provided by Ashley's son aligned with every detail. Moore had committed what's legally classified as an attempted murder-suicide. The attempted part would only remain true for one more day. Ashley passed away 24 hours later. The hospital kept her on life support just long enough to fulfill her organ donor status. The family consented. Medical staff coordinated matches. Her organs went to multiple recipients, individuals who may never know her name but whose lives were saved because of her choice. Before the surgery, Doctors and nurses at the facility held an honor walk. Hospital staff and Ashley's family lined the hallway as her gurney was wheeled toward the operating room. It was quiet. Some were in tears. Her sons walked beside her. It was the last moment they'd spend with her body before letting her go. Back at Boulder Creek, word of the shooting had already spread. Neighbors, many of whom had known Ashley for years, were shaken. They couldn't comprehend how violence had entered their building with such force. What disturbed them most was the realization that Ashley had tried to speak up. The Facebook post had gone live the same morning she was shot. The timing unsettled everyone. It didn't feel like something random. It felt like something preventable. For those who remembered the 1998 crime Ashley survived as a child, the comparison was inescapable. Then her mother Vivian had begged authorities for help. She was told to let them know if something happened. Hours later, she was killed by her stalker. Now, decades later, Vivian's daughter was dead under similarly predictable circumstances. She had raised the alarm. She had named her abuser, and still, no one had intervened in time. Karen Diaz, a childhood neighbor who had known both mother and daughter, said, "The rawness of it all just comes back. It's like someone rewrote the worst day of our lives with the same ending." The public's response came swiftly. Local media covered the shooting and Ashley's background in full. Photos of her and her children circulated widely. Her obituary, published just a week later, focused not on the crime but on her life, on her resilience, on her legacy as a mother who had done everything she could with the time she was given. A memorial fund was launched to support her sons. Within days, it raised over $6,000. Law enforcement officially closed the case after confirming Moore's identity, death, and motive. He left no note, no recording, no verbal confession. But the facts, the forensic trail, and the pattern of threats made one thing undeniably clear: he was responsible. And the only reason he wasn't charged was because he didn't survive. One investigator later said, "The scene told us everything. The only thing we couldn't do was stop it from happening in the first place." Ashley Fonseca's case is not isolated. Statistically, it fits into a documented category. Domestic violence homicides preceded by visible threats that go unaddressed. But statistics don't explain why systems continue to fail people who are actively speaking up. One of the most glaring breakdowns in Ashley's story is how her public warning, specific, time-stamped, and unambiguous, resulted in no emergency action. She didn't hint at fear. She detailed it. She didn't conceal the abuser's identity. She named him, and she wasn't describing theoretical danger. She was describing weapons, violence, and the possibility of being killed in front of her children. Why didn't that trigger an immediate response? Part of the problem lies in how social media posts are treated. Unless a threat is reported directly to law enforcement, it's not automatically reviewed or acted on. Platforms like Facebook have content moderation policies, but these are often geared toward removing graphic imagery or hate speech, not flagging credible cries for help. Unless someone manually reports a post as dangerous or threatening, it can slip through unnoticed. And even if it is flagged, there's often no direct line from the platform to police intervention. This puts the burden back on the victim or their circle. And that's another gap. When friends or family see signs of danger, there's no standardized pathway for what to do next. People hesitate. They're unsure whether calling police will escalate the situation. They fear overstepping. Some assume someone else will act. The result is paralysis, even when the threat is clear. In Ashley Sipp's case, those gaps proved fatal. There's also a wider issue of how threats made by intimate partners are perceived by authorities. Unless a protective order has been filed, or a past incident is already on record, there's often no official history to reference. That absence can lead law enforcement to treat the situation as lower risk, even when there are clear indicators of danger. But the warning signs are known. Domestic violence experts have cataloged them for decades. Escalation of verbal threats, possession or use of firearms, controlling behavior, and recent attempts by the victim to leave or assert independence. These are not abstract patterns. They're predictive markers. Moore matched nearly all of them. And yet, he was not on any watch list. No court had restricted his access to firearms. No mandatory intervention had been triggered by the behaviors Ashley described. In many states, including Ohio, these warning signs don't automatically generate legal action unless a formal complaint is filed, something victims often hesitate to do out of fear of retaliation or disbelief that it will help. That leaves a tragic reality. Someone can say out loud and publicly, "I'm scared for my life," and still be left without protection. It's not a failure of knowledge, it's a failure of priority. If you want more stories that shine a light on lives like Ashley's and push back against silence, subscribe to True Crime Case Tapes. Turn on notifications so you never miss what's next, and leave us a comment with your thoughts. Your voice helps bring attention to stories that need to be seen, shared, and acted on. There was never going to be a trial. By the time police secured the scene on June 25th, the man responsible for shooting Ashley Fonseca had already taken his own life. There would be no charges filed, no arrest warrant, no bond hearing. The courtroom stage, where most victims and families hope for some form of accountability, was never even built. Legally, the case was closed within 24 hours. Lawrence Moore was declared deceased by the Lucas County coroner, his fatal chest wound confirmed as self-inflicted. The weapon was recovered at the scene, matched by ballistics to both Ashley's injuries and the shot that ended Moore's life. For investigators, the facts were airtight. The only open question was what came next for those left behind. For Ashley's loved ones, the absence of a trial meant something deeper, the loss of a moment to confront what had been done. Her sons would never get to see Moore answer for the pain he caused. Her family would never have a day in court to say her name, to make her story heard in front of a judge, to hear a sentence read aloud. That's a specific kind of grief, not just for the person, but for the process that never had a chance to begin. In the days after Ashley was pronounced dead, her family turned their energy toward honoring her in ways that didn't involve legal proceedings. At the hospital, a decision was made that reflected who Ashley had been long before this tragedy. Her organs would be donated. Medical staff prepared for a procedure that would save multiple lives. Before the surgery began, doctors and nurses lined the hallway in silence, an honor walk held for organ donors. Ashley's sons walked beside her gurney. Friends followed behind. It was a moment of dignity in a story that had been defined by violence. Back home, the Toledo community stepped up. A fundraiser was launched to support DeAndre and DeAngelo, and over $6,000 was raised within the first week. Local residents who had never met Ashley shared the link, posted words of encouragement, and contributed what they could. Candlelight vigils were held outside the Boulder Creek complex. Neighbors left flowers and photos beneath a tree in the courtyard. One group held a balloon release at sunset with messages written on each ribbon: "You mattered, you were loved, you won't be forgotten." Ashley's obituary ran on July 3, 2025. It focused not on the way she died, but on the way she lived. A survivor, a mother, someone who had already overcome more than most people will face in a lifetime, and who had dedicated herself to breaking the cycle of violence. That legacy is now being carried by others. Her sons are living with relatives who've committed to giving them the safety Ashley always fought to provide. Community leaders have begun discussing programs in her name, including a scholarship for youth impacted by domestic violence. Justice, in the traditional sense, never came, but the impact Ashley left behind continues to grow. Ashley Fonseca did everything victims are often told to do. She spoke up, she named the danger, and she asked for help. Still, it wasn't enough to stop what happened next. That reality forces us to confront an uncomfortable truth. Awareness alone isn't protection. We have a responsibility to act when someone says they're afraid. Because if warning signs aren't followed by action, we're not preventing tragedy, we're just watching it happen. Let's carry her story forward by listening better, responding faster, and refusing to stay silent. Lives depend on it.